Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. We're really excited to be here with two great leaders in the industry and specifically in the communications world. I am Katie McBreen and I am Vice President of Communications and Strategy at the Consumer Brands Association. I would like to thank PwC for their support of the CPG Speaks series. Information on upcoming sessions can be found online at consumerbrandsassociation.org/CPG Speaks. So go check it out. We've got a great lineup in the coming days as well. Today, as I said, I'm joined by two communications professionals from different product sectors within the industry. First, Anna Umphress is Senior Director of Communication and Public Affairs, where she oversees business unit communications for all of Georgia Pacific. That's a lot of paper products. And then Sarah Kittel, who is Ferrara's Vice President of Corporate Affairs, and she leads the company's integrated communications and manages also their public affairs and government relations activities. So as you might imagine, they have no shortage of work to do these days. Anna and Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. We are really thrilled that you can be here, and I am certain this is going to be a great session. When the pandemic began, CPG companies were really forced to rethink the way their businesses operated. It was a crisis that hit the entire industry, the entire country, and from an increased focus on worker safety to adapting in the corporate setting to a remote workforce, you all had to pivot the way that you approached what you did. And communications, that was in communications in every part, I think, of business. Today, Anna and Sarah and I are going to discuss the pandemic's impact on communications, and I think it's going to be really great, and how their companies have shifted their approach on internal and external communications, and also what all of this means for the future, or what we think it means for the future, because there is nothing that is certain about the days ahead, it seems. So just to start off, Anna and Sarah, maybe because we all are passionate about the industry, but what drew you to the CPG industry, and what do you find to be the most rewarding part of your work these days? Maybe we'll start with Anna, since you're first in the alphabet.
Thanks. Interestingly, what drew me to the industry was a leader that I came to work for. He led the packaging division at Georgia Pacific, and he was very passionate about communications. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to come and work with him. Once I got here, though, I was just so fascinated with how things are made, and the opportunity to work for the different business units at Georgia Pacific has just been the thing that has kept my career being just extremely interesting for the 20 years that I've been here.
And Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I started my career on Capitol Hill, actually working in agriculture and agriculture appropriations. And it really was about how food was grown, how it then was made, distributed, shared with people all around the world. And fundamentally, I think for me today, working for Ferrara, it really is about sharing just little bits of delight in terms of confection, cookies. It really is just little moments that can spark memories, nostalgia, joy. That for me is what continues to keep me going at Ferrara, particularly at this particular time.
That and maybe a side of sugar, I suppose.
A little bit.
It's probably helpful during these times. I know it is coming in handy in our house. Maybe we'll go into specifics. Thank you both for sharing that. I always find it's interesting to know what makes people go into a certain line of work, and you have to love what you do, especially these days when it seems like we're doing a lot of it and it's infiltrating into our personal lives, and there's no separation between the two. So let me talk let's go first into sort of the impact on communications that the pandemic has had. And then I think we're also I want to maybe talk about the impact and then move to how it has changed your internal communications, and then what the future is going to look like and how the pandemic has changed what you do for the short term or forever. So I think when the pandemic began, the biggest shock about how we all had to approach communications was different for everyone. And I guess maybe I want to know, we've all been through crises, or you all have been through crises as a business or in your career as a communicator. How was this different than other crises that you've been through from a communication standpoint? I mean, obviously, pandemic, once in a lifetime occurrence, but what made this specifically different? And what were the shifts that you made in your communications, both internally and externally, when it began, and specifically when consumers were having trouble? And I think mostly, Anna, this is for you, when consumers were having trouble finding your products on the shelves.
So I'll tell you that I think the thing for me that's been different is just the duration, right? I mean, we've faced crises in communications that, you know, the intensity level lasts for a few days or maybe even a few weeks. But, you know, in this case, it was those first 3.5 or 4 months was just almost overwhelming in, you know, how much work there was to be done and how much communication had to be done, and how it just never, that cadence just never stopped. You know, we were really working probably, you know, 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, because there was just so much going on. So for me, it was really around the duration of the intensity. And then, you know, we get to the summer and it starts to slow down a little bit. People are starting to calm down and, you know, maybe being able to get out of their houses and that sort of thing. And then all of the racial and social injustice issues came up. And so it was like that intensity started all over again with just another set of communication tools. So that's been the thing that's been just been very different for me. And then in terms of how we sort of shifted our message or shifted our tone, you know, most of our communications, at least externally on the consumer product side, is around the product itself, right? What are the attributes, the benefits, you know, why should people buy it? When people actually couldn't find it on the shelves, you know, we worked really hard to be transparent about the fact that, you know, we understood that was challenging. We were working, we tried to be reassuring that we were working, you know, as hard as we could 24/7 to get that product to them, and in a lot of ways empathetic, because, you know, when we would go to our retailers, our local retailers, we were finding empty shelves as well. So that was really probably the main shift for us.
And I would echo Anna's sentiments. I think for us, you know, those of us too, as communicators who have really spent a good majority of their careers focused on issues in crisis, you know, particularly those of us in corporate affairs, there's no playbook for this. I mean, we work to plan and anticipate to the best of our ability how we will respond, react, engage, you know, certainly remedy a crisis situation for various aspects of our business and in past lives, you know, of clients' businesses. And this was something, as Anna said, that truly, I know the word gets used quite a bit, but is and remains unprecedented. And it was this need to have to react very quickly, certainly with a cross-functional, cross-sectional group of individuals within the company, to think fast in terms of how it is that we were going to respond to something that no one's been through. And the one thing, you know, that I'll tell you that we found really reassuring and kind of a really unassuring time was the amount of collaboration that we felt across industry, across sector, across stakeholder. This was something for us, you know, I could have reached out to Anna, I have no doubt, and said, Anna, what are you doing? What are some best practices that we can learn from you as you've gone through this with your company? We found in Chicago in particular, we set up a behind the scenes group of communicators from Pepsi to Walgreens, Tyson, McDonald's, ourselves, Ferrara, our partners at Ferrara, just to share that information. And we learned a lot from one another. And this was a time where information sharing was critical to collective success. And it's something that we've continued to do. We all stay relatively close, accessible, and it will be doing the same through the balance of this year into the winter. The foundation we built in March, April will certainly serve us well over the next few months, but we don't know what much to expect. So the ability to stay agile remains of vital importance in terms of how we respond to this situation.
Thank you. I think that's great. It's interesting that you said you have a group in Chicago that's come together. I think that's something that, these groups exist for different, professions, and I think communicators are particularly good about coming together. And I imagine there are a number of communicators on this call today who are hoping to learn some best practices from each of you. So in that vein, in those early days or early months, as we can maybe is a better way to talk about it, since the cadence and duration of this has been so prolonged. What was the one thing you took away, or the one thing that you learned that in your next crisis you would repeat or you would do again? Or you could also share what's something that you wish you had done that it took a while to get in place.
I can jump in to take that to start. I think for us, again, it's really relying on your experience and expertise when it comes to crisis and issues management. And it's certainly working from that foundation in terms of how you communicate early and often. For us, that approach, that we would take in any crisis hasn't changed in terms of how we approached the initial response to the pandemic in March, April, and how we continue to approach it. Incremental information, we've found, even if that information is simply nothing has changed, can be really reassuring to an employee base who is simply wondering what's happening in and around them, with their colleagues, the impact on the business, on the retail sector, the impact of really across the supply chain. And that reassurance, what we've heard from our employees, has been really fundamental in helping to continue to stay focused on working to simply get the job done.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Sarah. We talk about, really almost over communicating, right? Trying to get as much information as we could, as quickly as we could. One of the things with a lot of the guidance in this time from the CDC changing, right? So you put something out and you communicate that with employees, and then it changes and you have to communicate again. So I really do think that the over communication has really served us well here, because our employees do feel like, we're being as transparent and open with them as possible. And I think our consumers and our customers feel the same way.
Yeah, and I would just add, for us, it was a little bit of the mind shift. So we often think about our audiences as stakeholders, and we tend to segment them in terms of how it is that we speak to them. And really, a lot of the message was fundamentally consistent.
Yes.
It was broadly, what is the impact of the business? How might our supply chain be impacted? What would each of our stakeholders expect to, see, feel from us as an organization? And with respect to employees, it was shifting how we think about employees as communicators and leaders, and really remaining focused on our employees as our colleagues, not as our audience. And it might be a small shift, but to treat them as partners, for us, at least what we saw, really encourage people to mobilize in ways that they may not have under other circumstances, really coming together to solve unique business challenges, people, community problems in ways that continues to inspire and to impact the way in which we operate, service our customers, meet the needs and the demands of our consumers.
That's a great segue, I think, to internal communications. And it's interesting that you said typically you think of your different audiences and you segment them in terms of messaging. I'm curious to know, how did your internal communications change, and maybe even specifically, what kinds of communications are you using to reach both your corporate employees and then the employees that are out in the field? What are you finding to be most effective, and what do you think you'll keep moving forward that maybe you didn't have before, or something that you've changed that you found to really resonate with your employees? And that can go to both Anna or Sarah.
So I would say that, you know, we were starting to experiment with some different tools. I mean, clearly, you know, the days of writing a newsletter or, you know, just sending out an email are kind of over, right? The way that people receive information has become increasingly more digital. And so what we've really tried to do in our manufacturing operations is to utilize those digital tools. So we have digital signs in all of our mills where we were putting up lots and lots of information, creating, you know, GIFs and infographics and sort of snackable pieces of content that people could take, you know, take away with them really easily. We also launched a coded dashboard that was available at all the mills to really be very transparent about, you know, the number of cases we had and how we were, you know, dealing with close contacts and those kinds of things. And I think employees really appreciated being able to have that real-time information in the facilities. Of course, safety is paramount for us, and so we really doubled down on the safety messages because we had, you know, people really changing the way that they were working, and they were, you know, focused on their health and safety of their family, and so really wanted to make sure that they were communicating, you know, those messages as well. And the way that we did that is we really created phone trees for our supervisors to touch base with all of our employees on a pretty regular basis. So we encouraged them, you know, not just to have those face-to-face communications when they were in the mill, but to contact them when they were outside the mill and make sure that they were doing okay. And that's probably one of those tactics that we'll utilize in future situations.
Yeah, I echo Anna's sentiments. I think for us on, you know, the channel communications, the way in which we were able to reach our employees, we do have different means of communication, certainly for corporate versus our frontline, our facility employees. Those of us who are more connected, kind of rooted down in a chair in front of a computer every day, the means of communication, I think the rapid nature of which people can consume that information on the corporate side was certainly juxtaposed to that of those in our facilities. Many of our facility employees, you know, emails have expired because they don't require email as a main component of how it is that they continue to support the business, the organization, obviously their team around them. You know, Anna mentioned digital signage and billboards within facilities. 100%. We still use a message board, paper, to post information, and as that information would change, to make sure that they had the most up-to-date. It's posters. It's effectively a press kit. You know, it's making sure that we're sending the information out to the facility and really relying on a lot of our team members in our facility to serve as communication ambassadors or surrogates, people who have never had to really step into that role in the way that they did. Our human resources managers, our facility managers, our shift change managers, because information was evolving so quickly, and particularly that health and safety information, the requirements in our facilities was changing so rapidly, it really was a 24/7 approach in those first certainly 2, 3, 4 weeks to make sure that we kept and continue to keep our employees safe. I think on the content side, you know, as we shifted more from health and safety, which remains, you know, as Anna said, for her company, for ours as well, paramount, and you'll continue to hear that from every CPG. For us, it was also recognizing that we have all felt the impacts of this year differently. And it was being very mindful that one person's experience is likely not the same as another's, as we need to continue to be mindful of what everyone is uniquely juggling personally and professionally, and simply not forgetting that what it might be, for you or for one of our frontline employees is not perhaps the impact that our corporate employees have felt. And it was also important that we created a deeper connection between our corporate employees and our frontline employees through recognition of their continued efforts. We don't have a business without our frontline team. We don't have product to distribute, to provide to our customers, to our retail partners, to share with our consumers. And for us, we couldn't say thank you enough for people who showed up every day and continue to show up every day in support of the business and in one another. That message it can't be underscored enough.
I think it's really great what both of you have said, and in many ways it's bringing the humanity right back to the workplace, I think, which oftentimes business leaders can be uncomfortable with. But Sarah, you said each person have felt the impacts differently, and I love that you all are having your supervisors have these phone trees. I've heard CEOs are calling people, managers are calling their teams on a regular basis just to check in. And we often forget how those little touches of being human can make such an impact from a communication standpoint.
Yeah, one of the things we realized too, and this is more on the corporate side, business travel has effectively come to a ground stop. We're not going out to meet with our retail partners face to face, travel for industry events. Our sales team, largely, situated across the country, is themselves pretty static, and it's opened up a little bit more time. Time, right, is the most precious commodity we all have these days, but it's something that has allowed, in some ways, for a deeper connection, because people aren't on the road all the time. Again, that accessibility has increased. So those coffee chats, the lunches, to your point, kind of the CEO drop-ins, not the Zoom bombing. We don't necessarily want to send our CEO into random meetings. I think it might throw some people off, but more strategically, just to hear from him reaching out to employees, whether it's through text or email, just to say, I see you, I recognize your efforts, particularly in our facilities. A lot of videos, done on the iPhone, but shared with our employees, simple means of thanks, continued updates. Again, it is the human side of the equation, and not losing sight of that.
So specifically, and I think you all are giving me great segues. You'd think we had this planned. I love it when communicators get together. I want to know specifically, how are you using your CEO to communicate internally, and how has that been different than before, and what are you finding is really resonating that you might keep going beyond the pandemic?
Well, at Georgia Pacific, we actually got our CEO to record a message every week. So every Monday there was a video message that came out from Christian Fisher. On it, it would always start with a thank you for the work people were doing, a quick update on how things were going, and his thoughts about how people were handling the situation. And what was nice about that is that the cadence was very consistent, and people look forward to hearing from him on a regular basis. Before, he was always a good communicator, but before it was probably on a quarterly basis, talking about sort of, where we were from a business results type of thing, and to see a little bit more of his human side. Of course, for many months he was at home just like the rest of us, and so people got to see, different parts of his home, where he was working, and that was really that was very impactful. The main thing, though, that I will say is that because the communications were more consistent, they could be a lot shorter. And I think that is something that was really beneficial, not to have sort of this hour-long, dissertation about what's going on with the business, but, a 6 to 10 minute kind of clip from Christian that people could consume and you know, on a break or whenever. And so that's one of the things that our team really hopes to do on a more regular basis, to have those shorter, more frequent pieces of content.
Yeah, very similar for us. You know, we, with Todd, it was a combination of videos, email. We created a weekly reflection series, so very similar to what Georgia Pacific did that Anna was just mentioning. And it really was kind of that focused communication to provide updates on one or two key aspects of the business, of the team. You know, again, to Anna's point, it wasn't a deluge. We didn't want people to get lost in the communication, but by creating such consistency, there was that expectation. We set up some, we call them team halls versus town halls. We have had two all company meetings, town halls during the pandemic, both virtually, to allow the whole organization to come together for, again, broader updates from across the business. But the team halls, function by function, with Todd were, you know, around 45 minutes, to Anna's point, a little more bite-sized, if you will. Todd would give opening remarks, and it was a Q&A session. It was a smaller group, you know, more accessible, more intimate, perhaps more comfortable for people to ask questions, sometimes tougher questions, of him, of the business. And then again, you know, we talk about surrogates a lot in communication. Certainly people are hearing that word a lot with respect to the election, but all of our senior leaders serve as communicators across our business. And, you know, having that touch point, you know, as an additional relay to share information with employees was really important as well. And again, with our facility teams, those video messages went a long way. Recently, more in summer, around July, August, we felt comfortable with Todd going into our facilities. He did make his way around most of them, highest of precautions. But for him to go in and just see people from a distance, you know, not even the elbow bumping, just more of the recognition, really does go a long way. So I would say, you know, again, echoing Anna's sentiments, a CEO has been out front and center more than ever. And, you know, it's interesting, and it will be interesting to see how that cadence and that touch point continues over time. I don't see us regressing. I don't see us going back to just the quarterly all hands discussions and that's it. We'll continue to find a balance, but I think now there has really become that expectation from our employees and from many stakeholders to continue to hear on a more frequent basis from leaders, you know, at the highest aspects of our organization.
Yeah, I would agree with what Sarah was saying in terms of the leadership one level down from Christian. Saw, you know, the job that he was doing and the messages that he was sharing with the company wide, and then they took that and took it down to the next level. So what does it mean to our business segment? And it was really sort of that cascading of information that I think was even more impactful.
No one's ever going to say you communicate too much. So I think this has certainly been a good example of that. And I love the idea of team halls versus town halls. I think that's a great way to frame something, and I might find a way to steal that. I want to make sure that everybody on listening today knows that at any time you can submit your questions, and at the end we'll leave some time for Q&A. So at the bottom of the screen, there's a place where you can go on and submit your questions for Anna and Sarah. I want to move now to how we've changed, or how you've changed your external communications. And Sarah, you touched a little bit on your different stakeholder groups, and you know, I know you all work with reporters, investors, any number of audiences. How has there been, or has there been, a shift in the way that you communicate externally to those audiences, whether in cadence or message? How does that differ from your internal messaging? Any insight you can provide on sort of that internal external message and how you're getting that information out to your key stakeholders?
I can jump in on that one. So, for us, I think we do have various touch points in a variety of stakeholders. Certainly our retail partners being a kind of preeminent stakeholder group for our business, our suppliers being another. For us, really, it's been sharing information as information needs to be shared. And I think critically and fundamentally as communicators, we always lean into transparency, authenticity, to really establish first, and then build and nurture that credibility. And for us, it's been that transparency that has kept the line of communication open with our primary stakeholder audiences. It was knowing any type of shift within our business that may impact their own, what it is that we're doing to remedy that, different courses of action we might be taking. We know that our retail partners' business is critical. And as we all know from working in the CPG industry, different segments of the sector have taken pretty significant dramatic hits. And we certainly don't want to be another headache for them, in working to manage through the impact the pandemic has created for their business based on some shift changes and kind of sea changes of consumer behavior in terms of the way in which consumers shop. So that for us has been really instrumental in the supply chain as well. It's making sure that we've got backups to the backups. It's looking at everything soup to nuts, as the CPG analogy often goes, just to make sure that, if we do experience a delay in one important ingredient, critical to many of the products within our portfolio, that we understand and that we know other levers that we'll need to pull. And finally, I would just add for us, our media relationships are really important to our business. And, for us, it's been more of the two-way dialogue of keeping the lines of communication open, ensuring that our contacts know, we're available should they need to fact check a story, comment for a story. I think mostly we've really focused on the local aspect of how the business has been particularly impacted, but for us, we manage the message, I suppose, based on the topic that the media might be interested in covering.
Sarah, let me ask you one follow-up on that. Obviously, Halloween is 4 days away, so
yeah,
would be missing an opportunity if we didn't talk about candy and Halloween. How have you approached talking about the holiday or around trick-or-treating, recognizing that obviously this is a very different environment this year?
Yeah, very different, understatement. For us, Halloween is like our Super Bowl and our World Series and our Olympics all kind of rolled into one. It's a really important, critical holiday. And, for many families, comes with a lot of nostalgia, comes with a lot of tradition. And we certainly recognize for families that a lot of that tradition has really kind of gone out the window and families are creating new tradition. There's no doubt, as we've all heard in different cities, municipalities, states across the country, trick-or-treating is going to absolutely look and feel very different this year. And what we've heard from parents, working with our industry partners, National Confectioners Association has been really kind of key in support of the entire industry during this time. When nothing seems normal, parents desperately want something to be fun and familiar for their children. And in working with leading health officials, former CDC leaders, we want to help parents understand how to do this safely. And Halloween, it's actually evolved into more of a season than it is a single event. So we've heard parents sharing, even our own employees sharing different ideas in terms of setting up scavenger hunts in the backyard or doing a scavenger hunt at a local park to keep the kids distant, but still in a way to kind of hunt and seek, out candy, creating piñatas, different ways for kids to kind of get the trick and the treat, if you will, distanced parades, a lot of trunk or treats, a lot of candy shoots, and the way that people have found ways to attach them to their banisters or their balconies is something I've never seen before. But the creativity has been so encouraging, and I think mobilizing to find ways to really afford kids and families a safe, creative, and accessible Halloween. And we've partnered with the state here in Illinois. We've partnered with the city. We have something in Chicago going on right now called Hollow Week. And it's just a week-long celebration to make sure that, you know, again, that safe, accessible Halloween is certainly available, but it's a way to bring our communities together. And, you know, for us, it was additional philanthropy. It's working with United Way, the YMCA, St. Jude, our CPD, our CFD, Chicago Police and Fire. You know, it's making sure that we also provide our frontline employees with boo bags as a thanks to them in recognizing the work they've done. So it's been different, but at the same time, it's been so much more than it feels like it's ever been in years past. And we're all just trying to find the silver lining.
Well, we will do our part in my household to consume more than enough candy. Anna, maybe let me turn to you and maybe tell us a little bit about how your external communications have changed or shifted as a result of the pandemic.
Well, the first thing I would say is that we actually got the media call because it's very rare that mainstream media is going to be interested in toilet paper. So we were certainly happy to step into the spotlight when those calls came. Our business president actually responded to a Forbes inquiry on March 12th, and that really sort of opened the floodgates. And our team worked really hard to, like Sarah said, you know, have a consistent message, manage the message. But we actually have an in-house studio. We have a TV production studio in our building, a great group of professionals who work there, and they had some fantastic high quality video that we were able to pull together, and we provided that to media outlets so that they had B-roll to run for the supply chains, for all of their stories that they were doing. We worked really hard with our consumer knowledge group to provide statistics and data about how much toilet paper a family of four needs in a 2-week period. And we created some infographics that people could use. We jokingly called it TP math inside of Georgia Pacific, but I think it helped illustrate really what people needed to buy, and we tried to encourage people not to hoard, so that their neighbor could have some as well. The other group that really just knocked it out of the park for us was our social media team. We respond to as many of those consumers as we possibly could, but that team in those 3.5 months was, again, 24/7, really trying to help consumers understand what was going on, assure them that, supply was coming. And a lot of that gave our retailers a little bit of air cover, right? So consumers would show up at their local retailer and the product wouldn't be on the shelf, and it wasn't the retailer's fault. It was really, the just-in-time kind of supply chain with toilet paper and paper towels. And so having that very consistent message and trying to get it out in a variety of ways. The other thing that I will say was really interesting is we had worked with some regional influencers and had taken them earlier in the year and late last year to a couple of our mills and sort of showed them behind the scenes how product is made and the ins and outs of toilet paper and paper towels. And we actually reached out to them and shared a lot of our content with them, and they shared it as well. And so sort of those concentric circles of getting that information out.
I love your video on how toilet paper was made. I never knew, and the big, huge rolls and how they make it down into small rolls. Now it's a great argument when budget time comes around for budget for content creation. I think you never know how that B-roll is going to come in handy until you have a time like this, when then you can push it out to the media and you see it on TV stations, and there's your brand in a really positive way. I think that's a great segue to our last topic before we open it up to questions on sort of the future of communications efforts as it relates to the pandemic. Obviously, it has accelerated a lot of communications. It's accelerated a lot of pieces of the business as it relates to e-commerce or remote work. Is that true for communications as well? And where have you seen this sort of fastest acceleration in the way that you communicate? You both mentioned the CEO messages that you did that were less frequent and now are more frequent. Are there other things that you think will continue moving forward as a result of the pandemic?
You know, for us, you touched on e-commerce. I think just remote work for employees is two examples. I mean, quickly, yes and yes. I think on e-commerce, we've seen just an extraordinary shift in terms of, as I mentioned previously, how consumers shop in general. And we've had to work quickly to adapt our approach to meet those evolving consumer demands while just ensuring, Anna touched upon this too, that it doesn't dilute the inventory for other channels. So we continue to support where the need is and exists. I think on remote work, for us, we just had a conversation actually with our IT partners yesterday to talk about how we can continue to better enable the options available in platforms like Zoom. I think we feel like we touch about 55% of what Zoom is and has allowed us to do as an organization. We've gotten comfortable with breakouts, but there's whiteboarding and well, IT is going to be a little disappointed that I can't fully articulate what they could, but there just are a lot of options that exist within the platforms that we currently use that we haven't fully enabled. And for us, there is also, a need for continued change management communication. Anytime you are asking your workforce to adopt a different way of working, coming together through different means really fundamentally is change management. And it's how can we just help people better take advantage of those tools and resources we do have. Zoom University or online platform university, creating monthly sessions, doing trainings, creating a classroom. We actually do that with Workplace by Facebook as our internal support network. It's kind of our dynamic intranet. We have monthly options available for employees to learn more on how to use it and utilize it. And for us, as we look to whatever this murky, foggy, wish I had a crystal ball future that exists in today's environment, we will continue to rely on those tools. And certainly far after we start to experience, a different way of working. I won't even call it a new normal because I don't feel like there's much new to the normal. It's just simply a different way of operating in the future, where we know that our workforce will still likely be split between some home and some, working remote. So what the future holds, I wish I knew. And what we can do is just continue to leverage the tools in the toolbox that we have continued to build and amass over the last 7-8 months, modify them, adapt, learn, and I think through it all, continue to seek and find creative means of staying connected with one another.
So I have, exactly the same feelings or the same thoughts that Sarah did around, fully utilizing the tools that we have available to us. And, very much like e-commerce. So our e-commerce team talks about the fact that e-commerce grew, 3 to 5 times faster than really expected, and it probably would have taken several years for the number of people who have adopted e-commerce, shopping, concierge services, those kinds of things, to adopt that. Same with the tools that we have inside of Georgia Pacific. So we actually have the Microsoft suite of products, and so a lot of our video conferencing is done via Teams. And prior to the pandemic, we probably had a one-on-one call, or maybe, a small conference call with 3 or 4 people. When the pandemic hit, everybody had to go home and figure out how to use Teams to communicate, much more broadly. And not just have meetings with, 18, 20 people, but to Sarah's point, town halls or team halls with, 300 plus employees engaging. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that, you know, these tools aren't perfect, right? So I said we have a TV studio, they do, you know, high def production quality type things, but we learned how to video record on a Teams call so that we could, you know, send out messages to employees across the company. Well, sometimes the bandwidth would glitch or the picture wasn't, you know, crystal clear. And we had to get really comfortable with things not being perfect, but that we could get the message out at the time. And so I think one of the things that this whole situation has taught us is that, you know, the message is really important, the timing is really important, and if it isn't picture perfect all the time, that's okay too.
Thank you both. I want to now shift to some of the questions that have come in from the attendees. And one, you know, with a virtual environment, I think it's difficult to communicate in general, but it's also especially difficult if you have a new employee coming on. And would ask just, I know, organization writ large, your talent and HR teams probably have huge plans in place, but have either of you onboarded a new employee to your team? And what have you found to be specifically effective in making that successful, knowing that communications is such a collaborative, in-person, brainstorming type field?
So I actually did onboard an employee to support one of our business units. She joined the company at the end of March, so hasn't really had very many face-to-face meetings, probably a handful since, you know, maybe August. So the key was really kind of in those first weeks, almost a daily check-in, right? Just making sure that that she was in the right meetings, that her equipment worked, that she was making the right connections with people, and making sure that other people were reaching out to her. So part of Emily's job is social media, and so I made sure that our social media team was really connecting with her and making sure that she, you know, felt like she had the support and resources from teams all around our communications function. But it was really those regular check-ins and just making sure that she felt like she was connected, even though she, you know, didn't really have the opportunity to be in the office or be face to face with them.
Yeah, I same. I mean, you know, with employees from across the organization, new hire orientation is all virtual. You know, again, here we kind of talked a little bit about our CEO and our leadership engagement. Virtually now enables them to be a part of many of those orientations, to really kind of come in and just help our employees understand exactly the fundamentals of the business. You know, I think one of the things we didn't really touch upon as part of this discussion is really kind of how the mission, the vision, and the values of an organization continues to sort of serve as that critical fundamental North Star in terms of how we are all expected to comport ourselves. You know, for us, it's helping new employees understand the values of our organization. Our mission is sharing delight, and it really is ensuring that as, you know, communicators especially, they do have access to all of, you know, the various functions and leaders that they need access to. We've set up very similarly, we call them just stand-ups. You know, they're 5-10 minute check-ins in the mornings. It's really designed to be, don't sit down, because this isn't meant to be go through your task list. It is just how we feeling, how we doing, what's going on in your world. And 9 times out of 10, it's not business related. It's life. You know, again, it kind of harkens to the point on humanity. It's checking in. We do please meets. You know, we have a little template we fill out so people get to know each other. We kind of do really quick fire rounds when we're trying to set up time for new employees to meet other members of the organization. It's like $60,000 pyramid or whatever that game was, where you literally have like, you know, a minute and a half in the hot seat and you get all these questions fired at you. But again, it's about the human side. It's about, tell me about your family. You know, do you have pets, your kids? You know, what is your background? You know, where are your parents? You know, how are things going? That kind of thing. So for us, yeah, those have been really, really important. there's plenty of time to go into the task list of things. But that emotional and mental calibration is something that's been really important, especially I'll just speak for my team in particular. It helps you to better understand as a leader, where are people? You know, is today, tomorrow, a couple of days where you hear from an employee, I really need to take time, I need space. You know, I feel everything around me in my personal life is chaos. Okay, good to know. Like, let's talk about just prioritizing and let's make sure we give you the time. So it's making sure that you're just in tune with what is going on around you, bigger picture.
Another question from the audience. We've been hearing a lot of talk from CEOs lately in our community here about how companies are preparing for a potential second wave. And you could even argue that we're in the midst of it with the rise in so many states of COVID cases. What does that mean from a communication standpoint? And is there anything you're putting in place for an uptick in cases over the next few weeks or even months as we get into winter and cold season and flu season when things normally go up naturally?
For us, you know, again, we built such a foundation in March, April, and I would say, you know, we're more ahead of the curve now, not to overuse that reference, but certainly than we were, you know, as far as safety protocols, standard operating procedures that have evolved as needed with the pandemic. So I think from that standpoint, you know, our team has become more accustomed to what is expected of them in terms of how they keep themselves and others safe around them. You know, it is pushing a little bit more of that PSA, you know, it's kind of going back into some of the archives of 8 months ago, reminding people what socially distance means, reminding people what close contact means, making sure that everybody is very aware, familiar of the contact tracing protocols that we have in our business. We have temperature scanners, you know, that people are required to interact with a couple of times a day. It's reporting symptoms, it's getting a flu shot. It's recommending that they get a flu shot. So I think for us, again, it's sort of going a little back in time, reminding ourselves what, you know, what we utilized from a communication standpoint 6 months ago or so, and pulling a lot of that back out.
I would echo all of that. We're doing all of that. One other thing that I think is really interesting is that in most of our mills, we have sort of like an unofficial ambassador, you know, somebody who maybe an hourly worker or whoever who has, you know, really sort of taken to heart the social distancing and the protocols, and rather than, you know, a supervisor or the mill manager saying, you know, hey, you guys are too close together, or, you know, where's your mask? We have some employees who've just sort of taken that role on and gently reminded, you know, that peer-to-peer communication to say, hey, you know, we're getting a little bit lax in sort of, you know, how we're practicing these protocols. You know, fatigue is setting in, right? People are tired of being socially distanced and wearing a mask and doing all of these things. And so to have some of these, you know, these ambassadors who are doing that in our mills has helped, on top of all of the things that you talked about, Sarah, that we're pulling out as well.
I love that. It's always easier coming from a peer sometimes than from someone who is responsible for your review at the end of the year. Maybe before we wrap up, I want to ask just one last question. If you could each share one thing that you've learned in the past 6 months with your peers here on the phone, what would that be?
The one thing that I would say, not only just in communications, but across our consumer products business as well, is really the need to break down silos. You hear people talk about that all the time, but when we were in crisis, we didn't have time for, you know, 17 meetings to make a decision, right? We really broke down those silos. We became a much more flexible and nimble organization, really focused on working on the right things and making sure that we were meeting the needs of our customers as positively and as proactively as we could. And I'm, as an organization, our leadership is really, really trying to glean how that happened and why that happened and where it happened, and how we can continue to do that. Breaking down those silos has made all the difference in the world in the way that we've responded to this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, again, for us, it's making sure that we're really working with one another, seeing one another, not just as standard colleagues, but again, as partners. The only way that we managed through, as successfully as we did at the start of this pandemic was through an understanding, a recognition first of each individual's contribution, their expertise, what they bring to the table. The response to this pandemic was cross-functional, like we've never seen. But really, ensuring that collaboration, kind of empowering, as Anna was saying, the decision-making was something that really got us to act, to react, and implement very, very quickly. And, the other thing I would say is that sometimes in the day-to-day, we've talked a lot about sort of the human or the humanity side of things. The one thing that I do appreciate and take away from this is just this idea that you do spend just a little bit more time understanding where people are, and how this has impacted each of them differently. It's not to assume, again, any one person is experiencing this the same, and to not lose sight of why you do what you do, like why you show up every day, particularly as communicators, and particularly as Anna and I both have thousands of employees on the front line as essential manufacturing workers, continues to stay grounded in the human side of this pandemic.
I think that's so important, both at work and in our personal lives. I saw a quote that has resonated with me over the last several months, that we're not all in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm. And I think that's often really good to remember, that the pandemic is impacting us each in different ways, but it's impacting us all. So thank you so much. I think this has been really terrific. What I'm noticing here is that it all comes down to sort of the basics when it comes to communications. Be transparent, collaborate, and do it often. And perhaps those are all things that we need to remind ourselves. And I wish it didn't take a global pandemic to remind us to get back to basics, but there are silver linings and lessons in everything. So thank you, Anna and Sarah, for your insights and for joining today's session. I think this was really terrific. I know I got some good ideas out of it that I'll be taking away, and I hope everyone online did as well. Again, we'd like to thank PwC for their continued support of the CPG Speaks series. We welcome your feedback on today's session, and you can submit comments using the chat feature or by emailing us at education@consumerbrands.org. Just a little marketing pitch here. We have several sessions that are lined up for November for anyone on. One on crafting long-term plans that meet investors' expectations with investor relations professionals from Philip Morris and Nestle on November 4th. And on November 10th, we will be joined by Pepsi CEO Stephen Williams on rethinking consumer relationships. So you all can register for those sessions at consumerbrandsAssociation.org/CPG Speaks. Thanks again to Anna and Sarah, and be well, everyone.